What's really going on is the globalists wreck the third world, which isn't hard to do. They play different tribal groups off against each other. This is in their own documents we've listed here. They then export large portions of the third world population to the first world, get them on welfare through multiculturalism, turn them against the domestic population, and use the imported poor to wage war against the middle class. Then the illegal aliens become legal. They pull the lever to disarm the population, to rob the population, thinking they're going to get some of the booty. It's then given to the central banks. And we saw this with Copenhagen, where they promised Western money for the third world, but really it was take the West money, take the third world's money, and give it to the banks. This is how the game is worked. Pressure from below and above. Bob Chapman of the internationalforecaster.com, financial expert, fighting the globalists for more than 45 years. He joins us now. He heard the tail end of Damon Vickers. And, you know, I have Damon on because he really believes what he's doing is good. He really believes this global government is coming and that that's pretty much what's needed. And when you talk to globalists, and he's a pretty high-powered guy, they really believe they're right. They really believe this is good at that upper mid-level that he inhabits. And so we have him on so people can hear it from them. That's why we had Rothkopf, the head of the Kissinger Group, on. So you can hear it from them. Okay? And, I don't think Damon is a evil person. I think he, in his own way, is being an opportunist to play both sides of it, to position himself well, as he said. And I asked Bob Chapman, who didn't hear the interview, he's heard the last 5 minutes on hold, what he thought. He said, I think that guy's an opportunist. And that's pretty much what Vickers says. He says that's all we can be. So that's kind of that world view of just assess the way things are and go with that. No, I'm going to assess the world and try to change it for good as long as I don't violate other people's rights, liberty, or property. But your take on population, then we're going to get into the Copenhagen situation, lawsuits being filed against the fraudsters, what's happening with the economy, what's happening with the dollar, with gold, with Bob Chapman, and we'll continue with your phone calls as well in this hour. Bob Chapman, you hadn't been with us for 3 weeks because of the holidays. Good to have you back with us.
Well, thank you very much. It's great to be here, and I don't think in the future population's really going to be a problem. And population, as you've said before, is going to level off, and it'll be a natural occurrence of events. There's countries that you can go to, our neighbor, like Mexico, where everybody used to have 5, 6, 7, 8 children. Immigrants who came to America, particularly from Italy as an example. In Ireland, they used to have lots of children. Instead of having 3 or 4 or 5, 6, now families are having 2, maybe 1.5. And that's happening in most societies that want to advance. They realize that it's a handful paying for and clothing and making sure that the children get the best education possible so they can be successful in life. So it's happening all over the world, and I think in some sections of the third world it might continue to be a problem, more of a problem than it is elsewhere.
But we certainly don't have forced abortions and nerve gas people and put bioweapons in there, which they've been doing.
That's right, and that's tragic, and it shouldn't be. And it was just like this H-1B1 scam after scam after scam.
What about my point that they're exporting third world populations to use them as weapons against the West?
Absolutely, and Europe is a perfect example. The Muslim population moving out of the Middle East and Northern Africa. There's a mosque on every on every corner, so to speak, and a number of people who have never spoken about the issue before in public, for record, even Sarkozy in France, who's certainly not a racist of any kind, says we got to do something about this problem.
France is dying. France is dying. England is dying. There are more Brits leaving England every year than are born there. The West is dying. There is no doubt.
Well, that's true. And it's the amalgamation of peoples, which, at least religiously in Europe, is untenable. It's only a matter of time before this clashes. And the Muslims tend to have more children. In Europe, they have about 1.5 children per couple. And I don't know what the number of Muslims are, but I think it's probably 3, maybe even more. And so the attitude is totally different. The cultural, the thing that goes on inside their society, the Muslims, is totally different than the history of Indo-European culture. And so you've got to have a clash. It's not good.
But instead, we have the BBC calling for carbon rationing of food to everyone and cutting the West down to 1 child. You have this hatred by the liberal intelligentsia of the West. They relish the fact the West is dying. They celebrate it. When I was in college, I was alerted to this enemy because they celebrated the death of the West. These are truly self-hating people.
I think you're absolutely right. And, there's something intrinsically wrong with people who want to amalgamate people and put them into serfdom and have this so-called intelligentsia that knows better than the public does what's good for them. And this whole concept. We are the leadership and we know. Well, I got news for them. There's millions of people who are just as smart as they are throughout the entire world, and they're not going to let them do this. It's wrong, it's unnatural, and to force people to become members of a new world order or force people not to have children is not natural. It's wrong.
Well, they only allow the immigrant populations to have their racial identity, and the Ford Foundation and others globally fund hatred of the West. But that's only because in this stage of the game, the controllers, the intelligentsia, are directing these giant hordes of people as weapons. Here's the New York Times. Immigrants riot in Italy amid racial unrest. Thousands of immigrants protested against racism, when it's Africa that's invaded Italy over and over again, in a southern Italian town on Friday after a night of rioting. In one of Italy's worst episodes of racial unrest in years, dozens of Africans in several cities smashed car windows with steel bars, stones, and set cars and rubbish bins on fire. Police said at least 1 car was attacked by passengers inside, several of whom were injured. So we have racial attacks. This is going on everywhere, but it's always loving. Oh, they're just striking back against evil. No, they're brought in, they're put on welfare, they're positioned as weapon systems. And again, in Europe, they'll play 2 Eastern countries, whites, off against each other. In Africa, they'll play 2 African tribes off. In Latin America, they'll play 2 different groups off against each other. It's simple divide and conquer.
I think you're absolutely right. And I lived in Africa. Those sort of things were not going on at that time, at least in Zimbabwe and South Africa where I lived. But since then, and that was 30 years ago, since then, the situation has changed dramatically, and you're right about the genocide that goes on, and this is to control. When the Western powers were in Africa, they totally controlled everything because they took the countries over. Then they decided, well, what we're going to do now is we're going to pull out, let them have their own government, but we'll still control them. And that's what's going on today. Only the Africans don't realize that. They're not that sophisticated.
Well, that's the old British model of take your flag down, but control your puppets, and the people will take 10 times the abuse. Absolutely.
Absolutely. That's the way it works. The British were the largest colonizers in Africa, and they did bring law, order, development, and they took their piece of the action as well. But having lived there, the process worked well for the local people. I mean, prior to them coming, they just had one war after another.
That's right. All of Africa has descended into hell. The crime rate is up several thousand% in South Africa, but the media won't talk about it. And now we have one of the Italian members of parliament is in trouble, the New York Times says, because he said, quote, we've tolerated all this illegal immigration all these years, and that's what's causing this now. See, the politicians aren't even allowed to tell the truth because this process of destroying the West must accelerate just as the empires have destroyed the third world, because that makes them more easy to manage. And you use a third world population to blow out the economy, drive down wages. You get them on welfare as a voting bloc that takes over the country.